Welcome, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting, as we always do, by reading the Land, Water, and Life Acknowledgement. And to those tuning in from home, this is the Conservation Commission monthly meeting. The town of Durham, New Hampshire, wishes to acknowledge the spiritual and physical connection maintained by the Pennacook, Abenaki, and Wabanaki peoples to Ndakina, Aki, Nibi, Lolaquikak, and New Hampshire has been home to these indigenous people for thousands of years. The residents of Durham acknowledge the ongoing hardships endured by our indigenous neighbors after the loss of their unceded homelands, which we now steward, and we will work to foster relationships to support the well-being of indigenous people who carry forward the traditions of their ancestors. Okay. So I think at this point we need to do a roll call and seating of our alternates. So let's go around, and is there anybody else on Zoom? Is it just you, Michael?
Yeah, it's just Michael.
It's just Michael, okay. So do you want to start? And
Yes.
We can come around.
I'm
Okay.
Steve Moyer. I'm an alternate.
Alternate.
Wayne Burton, I'm a member.
Ann Lightbody, alternate.
Okay, Erin Hale, Vice Chair, Acting Chair for today.
Sarah Callahan, Land Stewardship Coordinator.
Okay, so I think we are seating all three of our alternates. Is that?
And Aaron, if I can just
Yeah, please
mention.
jump on in.
Okay. Dwight Trueblood, Nick Lancer, and Neil Slepian cannot make it tonight, unfortunately. And I haven't heard from Richard Kelly, but he may be late coming from work.
Okay, thank you. And Michael, do you need to say who you are as role?
Michael Barron, Durham Town Planner.
Okay, thank you. So, and then do I need to make a motion to seat the
Nope.
three alternates? No. So we are just going ahead and seating our three alternates who are in chambers.
Do we have a
at this point.
quorum?
We do, as long as our three alternates are seated.
Good.
Correct. Okay. Wonderful. And at this point, we need to make a motion to approve the agenda that Michael sent out earlier this week. Do I have a motion to approve our agenda for this evening? Okay. And we have,
I guess I would propose an amendment that we address the previous minutes towards the beginning of the meeting, since we've run out of time in the last few meetings, and maybe we
Okay.
want to,
so
maybe we want to address that
do you want
earlier.
to review the minutes now before we jump into public comments? Or maybe we can do public comments and then the review of minutes before the land stewardship update?
Sure.
Okay. So do we have is that something we need to do a formal motion for, Michael?
Yeah, we should vote on
Okay.
that.
Okay. So is there a second to the amendment to the approval of the agenda, where we'll review the minutes after our public comment period?
I'll second that.
Okay, and then we need to take a vote. All in favor of amending? Okay, 4 in favor? Great. Okay, so we've amended the agenda, and at this point, we can open it up for public comment. Is there anybody in chambers right now who would like to comment, or on Zoom? We don't have any applications this evening at this point, so, okay. All right, so I guess now we'll review the minutes from June 10th, July 22nd, and August 6th. Does anybody have any amendments to those minutes that they would like to bring forward right now? No amendments? Okay, can we get a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Okay, great. So there's a motion to approve the minutes. Was that a second?
Was I seconding your motion?
So I think we had one motion. Steve motioned.
Great. I will
Second.
second Steve's motion then.
Okay.
Excellent.
Wonderful. Okay, so all in favor of approving those minutes?
Aye.
Okay.
I
right.
I abstain. That was my birthday celebration.
Oh, okay. Okay, so three, and I'll also chime in. So 4 in favor, 1 abstention to approve those minutes. Okay, that was quick. Thank you for that suggestion, Anne. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Sarah for the land.
Well, don't we still have to do July and August?
Yeah, we have some old ones.
Oh, sorry, I was just sort of doing it all at once. June.
Oh, well, July, sorry.
Okay,
Just as, actually, it's just a typo.
okay. So,
Stillworthy was misspelled. It says Stillworthy.
okay, so let's go back. We've got an amendment to the July
My
22nd.
apologies.
Or actually, Sarah, if it's just
typo.
straightforward.
If it's a typo?
Yeah,
Or if it's just send me an email
You
and
got
we'll
it.
correct it.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Does anybody else have any other amendments to any of those minutes? Okay. Okay, so land stewardship update?
yeah, hello. I'm going to plug my computer in. So I will start out by giving an update on the Long Marsh Preserve, I think. So kind of my big trail project for the past few weeks has been to resurface the bog bridges at Long Marsh Preserve. So I've been out in the field there quite a bit, so I have some photos to share with that. You will also see that I sent a memo with a proposal for an additional wetlands crossing that needs to be updated at Long Marsh Preserve. So we'll go over that next. And I will start with some of these photos. So I don't know how many of you have been out to the Long Marsh Preserve before, but there are 2 extensive bog bridges that go across 2 different wetlands right along. And I have some before and after photos to share. So these bog bridges were originally put in 2000, whoops, I went to make that bigger, about 15 years ago. And every 3 to 4 years, they've either been resurfaced or they've been completely replaced. So because of their environment that they're in, the boards tend to degrade pretty quickly. And it was time, again, because of the unsafe conditions, to resurface those boards and replace the ones that needed to be dealt with. So I have some photos. These are my X's. You can see from some of the prep work I did. You can see there's some boards completely missing and broken. And there's water lily because it's pretty. So fairly grown in and in disrepair. And so those are kind of the 2 different bog bridges where they started. And let's see, I'm going to go back to here. Well, I have some photographs. I had 3 different volunteer work days. There we go. So here's some of the stretches of bog bridge that have now been resurfaced. Some of these photographs, I should say, we don't have to watch this. This is the unloading of all the lumber. And this 3 by 8 hemlock was purchased from Goose Bay Lumber and wet. It is extraordinarily heavy. So it got delivered and it was kind of nice that it sat there for a couple weeks because the top boards dried down enough that 2 people could carry 1 board. But some of the lower, wetter boards, we actually needed 3 people because of their weight. I'm going to pass through some of those. And And so I have some photographs of our workday out there and some of the great volunteers that I had, and I just wanted to share that. And probably, let's see, I'll end with there, with 3 of my volunteers posing over the bog bridge. So that's 2 of them. Let me get these other photos up. So the 3rd crossing that needs to be addressed is photos. There we go. Along the Sweet Trail, and it currently is an old stone bridge. So if you have, which is actually kind of down, can you see my pointer? Sometimes you can't. Oh yeah, you can. Kind of down here at this end of the Cromet Creek. If you've been out to Long Marsh, that stone bridge is really, really cool. And what I learned a little bit about the history is that there's a lot of bedrock and like 2 or 3 old stone quarries actually on Long Marsh Preserve. And they would quarry rocks here and bring them to the mills in Newmarket. And they would bring them across this stone bridge and ford. But over time, the boulders kind of flanking the bridge have kind of sunken down into that mucky wetlands, soils, and caused some of the water to rise. So between that, you're seeing flooding along the trail on either side of that stone bridge. So this has been, we've known this needed to be addressed and have been kind of looking at the land stewardship subcommittee for a few months, kind of talking about different options we had. And in the last meeting, they've settled on a choice, and I wanted to go over that with you. So this is kind of looking down to the long beaver crossing, and you can see Cromet Creek is kind of running this way. And here's Cromet Creek. So the proposal is actually to put a bridge in kind of at the pinch point along Cromet Creek as it drains down Colby Marsh. So it would extend from this boulder right here across to the bedrock on the opposite side. And it would be about a 14-foot long crossing with a railing because of its height above the water level. I am actually currently standing on a beaver dam, the middle of a beaver dam, looking downstream. And I just wanted to point out one of the reasons why the subcommittee liked this idea, and I do too, is if you're standing on a bridge kind of at the same height that I'm at, you can see you have this very lovely view down into the wetland, and right here is that stone bridge, right as the water enters into that wetland. So this is now looking upstream at that same boulder on the right-hand side, which would cross over to the bedrock right on this top of this flat face right here. So in order for this to occur, in addition to the crossing, which would be mounted to the actual stone, this boulder, probably to make it safer for folks to get to the top of, there would be a set of wooden stairs that would climb along the side up to the top. And then because of the thin soils on top of this bedrock, there would be a land bridge that extends to here, and it'd be the 2 sections of about 10 feet long. So this is looking from the top of the boulder to the bedrock. And this is a video kind of that shows you how you would approach going to the top of that boulder as you're coming across, except for the finger. You also might see my dog. There she is, peeking around the corner. All right. So the estimated cost for this project to be done was $10,500. That would be done by John Martin Forestry, and I've been working with Greg DeSanto from there to kind of come up with a plan for this location. They the project this November. So I think I had a request for $12,000, which would give me a little bit extra just in case there's overage with the project, if there's unseen circumstances that might increase the cost. I've requested that come from the Land Stewardship Patrons Trust. So for those of you who are relatively new, the Land Stewardship Patrons Trust is actually privately donated funds from individuals in the community, mostly in town, to the town specifically for trails projects. And that fundraising project was spearheaded by Mullen Clyde and Ann Welsh several years ago, so that projects like this could get funded and done in town. So that funding actually is private donations and not coming from any particular town fund or taxes. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
What is the expected lifetime of this bridge? I would hate to be on top of it when it collapses.
When it collapses.
As all things eventually do.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the benefits, and I think I outlined several of them, but one of the benefits of this project over others, like those wetlands crossings, is that it is in dry conditions, and that really extends the lifetime of a bridge. Wooden bridge. This would be made out of pressure-treated wood. I would imagine 30 to 30 years, probably, for this particular project, just because it's on dry land. A lot of those wetlands crossings can last 15 to 25, depending on the materials. But that intersection of water and air creates significant degradation over time. Yes.
You just said that the project would involve pressure-treated wood. Is there
Correct.
any concern about that in a wetland area, or
It is in a wetland area.
Outside of the wetland,
That is
there
correct.
less concern?
That's right. So one of the benefits of this project, which I didn't mention, is when you go from bank to bank across a drainage or stream along a trail, it does not require a DES permit. In addition, because it is remaining high and dry, very comfortable using pressure-treated wood because you don't have that contact with your water resource, with the chemicals within the pressure-treated wood.
Sarah, can I ask why you guys, and maybe you already did consider just putting some big hemlock boards down where people are crossing normally at this point? Is there a reason why you guys have decided to go with just a much bigger structure where before I think people were just kind of skirting around?
And let's see if I have more photographs. So because of the historic nature of that stone bridge, there were discussions about the stone forts and fill that in so that we're essentially reestablishing this. And then folks from the historic committee had concerns about modifying the structure that was there. Although I did try to reassure them that the stone bridge in and of itself wouldn't be changed. I have never experienced the stone bridge being underwater. the bridge itself. However, it has gotten awfully close to the top. And the idea is that this structure would offer longevity because we are seeing increases in water levels from climate change, as well as changes in beaver activity, that elevating this and putting it in another location would improve the chances that it would last for a longer period of time versus investing in a structure downstream, right at water level, that 5 years, 10 years, maybe it would be as much as 15, might be underwater. They also considered building something that went on top, that went say from the bank to the middle of the stone bridge, and then again from the stone bridge over to the bank, and there were concerns that you were essentially covering up and the structure, that the stone bridge. So this way you were able to kind of highlight the stone bridge through some educational materials. You're able to view it from another perspective. And again, I mentioned in this particular case, there is also that you're kind of creating a really a viewpoint for people to stop and appreciate and enjoy.
The bridge over the ravine at Wagon Hill Farm has really worked out well. And we forget there's snow on it all winter too. But that bridge hasn't shown any wear or tear since it's been installed. And both sides now, with the fill they put in it, it's pretty solid. So I was kind of concerned about mud on both sides, but that hasn't happened either. So that bridge is working really well. If this one is like that one, then it's going to be solid.
Yeah, I don't think it's not going to be as wide. I'll say that. So, and that brings up a point about use. So, when you throw in some stairs, that limits the use. The Sweet Trail does not allow mountain biking. So that was also another consideration of what type of crossing we put in. There was done by a member that we actually put in like a bridge along the wider portion of the stream, but that would be a 25-foot crossing. That is a substantial structure. It would be very expensive and not necessary given the allowed uses on this particular trail.
And it won't be wheelchair accessible.
It will not be.
Yeah.
Nope. It's not now either.
And I think
many of our trails are not.
the consultant you're getting will probably find alternative ways when they give us their report on how best to design the trails. We'll avoid that kind of thing, so there'll be access other ways. That's what I assume.
Yeah, and I don't believe Long Marsh Preserve was part of that original proposal, although I think part of the thinking is that, the bog bridges, also, those are being resurfaced, and it is not a structure that is currently allowable by DES regulations. But they also are bike limited and accessible limited as well. And so I think a future iteration of those bog bridges would be to actually create a boardwalk. And at that time, we probably would do some assessment about creating the boardwalk accessible and maybe even the whole Long Marsh Road. So you can start out from the parking lot and maybe take Long Marsh Road all the way down to that crossing. But that's a few years out at this point.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Michael has a question.
Michael?
Well,
Yes.
Sarah, do you, the Conservation Commission is authorized to approve the expenditure on their own. And do you know how much is in the fund now?
$15,000, a little bit more. Yep. So this would essentially drain it down. I did talk to Ann Welsh.
Did you say 50 or
1.5,
Okay.
1.5, 15.
Okay,
1,000.
sorry, I misheard.
So about which fund she would prefer me to make the request from, and she said, well, the Patrons Trust was designed, it was there for these projects. That's why we fundraised. So she would like it to come from that fund. Yes.
Sarah, that day, we saw you out there when you were getting the lumber, I think. We walked down through
Oh,
there.
yeah.
And it's a tricky spot right now for old people like me to get over. And it's a dynamic spot, which I think you were referencing with water and beaver dams and
Yes.
that narrow cut. So I would just say, a more permanent structure like you're proposing seems like a really good idea for that particular spot. So I just wanted to.
It is,
say
and folks have thrown like wood in there to try to make it easier, or branches, which isn't good for the water system as far as maintaining flow and draining, and can cause additional like flooding and water backup. So I did with a volunteer kind of pull a couple boards from the bog, make a makeshift one that's just kind of helping out in the time being, but it isn't safe, and it is a very well used and loved trail. The Sweet Trail is. If you're not familiar with it, I didn't give enough background. I think I did in my memo, but it crosses multiple landowners. So after crossing through the town, it goes through the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests, and then New Hampshire Fish and Game, as well as the Nature Conservancy. And this past spring, we met and kind of had a discussion, because all of the wetland crossings saw deterioration across all of the Sweet Trail. And so we're kind of coordinating efforts between the four of us to kind of revamp the whole Sweet Trail. There's also, Joanne Glode from the Nature Conservancy also ordered new sign tags and had some of the new wooden signs also made. One of those will go in the town, and those will get posted. We're just trying to refresh the whole trail. And if you haven't done it, it's, I think, just over 4 miles, and it's all the way down and all the way back. It will get you 8 altogether, so.
Okay. Any other questions for Sarah? Do we have a motion to approve the expenditure for the bridge? Okay,
do
Steve,
that.
thank you. Second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
So I think what I didn't mention is the other bog bridges came to the Conservation Commission to ask for funds. I actually applied for and got a grant for those crossings. At this time, there might be a potential, but that would lead me to the second part of my of this evening, which is to say that I have accepted a position at the University of New Hampshire as their Community Conservation Extension Field Specialist. So that will actually be starting next Monday. So this Friday is my last day with the town. But I have become pretty invested in the work I've been doing. And so I have already been asked to subcommittee as a volunteer. So I think they voted me in as an alternate. So that'll start next month. And I've been putting some effort into trying to network and find a replacement for me. That was a request Todd had asked. And at this point, we do not have a replacement. But I have a couple potential people that might end up working out. And then if that falls through, then I drafted and Todd approved of a job announcement that will go out and get posted. So I've been putting some work into that. And that's probably it for now. We had a great, do you want to talk about the beaver walk, our beaver and fungi walk?
Yeah, go ahead. You can talk
And
about it.
so, right, so our first Discover Durham's Trails was a couple Sundays ago, and Amy
Amy Ross Davis.
Ross Davis, thank
who's
you.
a Durham resident. Yes.
And I led the walk, and Rachel sent out an email, said, oh, well, there's 9 people signed up. And then we got, I think, 30 adults plus kids. Wow. It was very well attended. It was a beautiful day at Long Marsh Preserve, and it was a lot of fun. And Erin handed these out, but the next one is at the Oyster River Forest on October 6th, and Ellen Snyder will be leading that walk on behalf of the town, and talking about kind of transition in the fall from plant senescence and seed production and what wildlife are doing to get ready for the winter, so as the focus. So that will be fun.
Yeah, and I would say, yeah, thank you again, Sarah, for all of your incredible work for the town. And the walk the other weekend was just so great. People were really enthusiastic and so happy that we were doing this. I think a lot of people are just super eager to learn about the flora and fauna and ecosystems. And so I'm excited we've got some more of these planned. It would be great to have more Conservation Commission folks, even just one more person on the walk. It was really nice to have Sarah and me and Amy there, because with a big group, people got kind of spread out. So it was nice to have another person or two there to help with that. And so if there's anybody who is thinking about coming on October 6th, I actually can't be there that day. We have friends visiting from out of town, so I won't be able to make it. Ellen Snyder, who was a previous land stewardship coordinator, will be leading the walk, and it should be great. But are you able to make it, Sarah?
I
You're
think
not sure?
so.
Okay.
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you might.
I should
and
be
maybe
able to
you
make
could
it.
ask land stewardship if there's anybody from there that would want to come and kind of represent, even just help being there at the beginning for parking. That was an issue because we had so many people. So having a couple extra hands to help direct people about where to park and things like that was helpful. So yeah, just another opportunity. Let me know. Yeah.
And the other thing is that we asked how many people had Long Marsh Preserve before, and I would say only about a third or a quarter
Yeah.
of them actually had. So
Yeah.
the vast majority of people hadn't been out to Long Marsh Preserve to take a walk around.
Yes.
So, and that in and of itself has some value of just
Definitely.
having people connect to these great conservation areas that we have.
Yeah, and I do want to just acknowledge again the department, the Parks and Rec department, and Rachel and all of her help organizing and doing all the communications for that. I think that was the big reason why we had such a big audience there, because they do a great job. So, so yeah, is there anything else, Sarah? Any other comments, questions for Sarah before we
Do you
move
know the origin of the orange markings on Wagon Hill Farm?
No, I don't. And Todd forwarded that email to me, he
Did
sent
the pictures? Did he
with
send
the
you
pictures, your email to him, and I am not
They
aware of that.
They look professionally done, but I haven't seen anybody out there since, and they're starting to wash away, so who knows?
Yeah, I don't know.
All right, well.
I don't think Rich Rain knew either.
He didn't either.
No.
It's a mystery who, it was, because it says it blocks the trail. It says don't use the trail, and it's around the corner, and I thought it was it was Portsmouth, but I have no idea, so I'll just let it go until.
I would just like to echo Erin's comments, to thank you for your service. I've only been on Concom for a few months, but I've been very impressed by the depth of your knowledge and all of the diversity of projects that we have tasked you with. So thank you
Our
on
loss,
behalf of the town.
our loss is definitely UNH's gain.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
All seconded. Thank you, Sarah, for all you do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so-
Extension is very lucky to have you.
And so glad we'll be able to retain you on land stewardship as well.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, so I think it's time to move on to our next big agenda item for the evening, which is reviewing again our wetland and shoreland overlay district zoning amendment. So I was thinking that perhaps we could start tonight where we left off at our last meeting. Unfortunately, Neil and Dwight aren't here today, but I'm hoping most of us have been here for the last couple of discussions, and we've got Michael here. So we can pick up where we left off. And I think we made some really great progress in our last meeting in terms of getting past that difficulty in imagining that 330-foot buffer, especially along our shoreline. So Michael, you've done some work revising the amendment based on our conversations last month, and I was thinking we could start there unless anybody else had any other thoughts about where to pick up, or if anybody had any initial questions, thoughts before jumping right in. Okay, so Michael, would you mind, could I turn it over to you just to kind of explain and reiterate the changes that you've made and just remind us about those from last month?
Sure. I want to note too that Dwight and, as I think you know, Dwight and Neil were on the committee that put together the
Yes.
draft with other people, and they've kind of been tonight, but they were okay with continuing on. And again, some of you are new on the commission, so I just want to emphasize that the commission is not going to rush this thing, and you know, even if you make decisions, you can revisit them, so you don't have to worry about, you know, making the wrong decision. The commission will revisit and make sure that everyone's comfortable with this. One of the trickier items was the proposal and the plan to increase the buffer on waters from 125 feet to 330 feet, which is significant. I expressed concern about that, but at the last time we talked about this, you know, we talked about a couple of things, that other changes that might help to balance this increase, and those changes, so those changes would be, and you have it in front of you. It's items marked in blue.
Okay.
That the buffer in terms of the requirement for vegetation would not exceed 150 feet. Because this is one that's, it's complicated, and it can be a little sensitive for landowners, and it's also a fair amount of work for Rich Rain and me. So I think if that is kept at a maximum of 150, that would help. That's on page 6. And then the other changes, the other adjustments are on the bottom of page 12 and 13. And those pertain to the conditional use process, which is a little cumbersome, certainly for landowners, and not for the town. I mean, that's what we do. But so if we are substantially and the applicability of the ordinance, it would help if some of the more difficult aspects of the conditional use process were visited. And keep in mind, there's really generally two kinds of conditional uses in our ordinance. One is, if you look at the table of uses, there's lots of uses that are by conditional use. And so conditional use is a process that, you know, it's a little bit more difficult than something that's just permitted by right. Not only do you have to do a site plan when that's in order, but up front you have to show that a proposed conditional use will meet 8 criteria and not have significant adverse impacts. So there's many conditional uses in the table of uses, and these are, you know, what we planner types call uses, and this is, you know, multi-unit, nursing home, home occupation 2, child care center, communities, you know, all those kinds of things that are the use of a site. And then the second type of conditional use is other sorts of activities like something in the wetland and shoreline overlay district. It's not really a use, but it's all kinds of things that would occur in the overlay district. Some of these actually are things we would call a use, like a multifamily house, but it's other activities, conservation activities, forestry, utilities, etc. So for landowners, if more things would be subject to conditional use because of the wider buffer there, I think it would be helpful if some of the more questionable procedures were changed. So on the bottom of page 12, you'll see that the 8 general criteria for conditional uses would not apply in the overlay district. And this is the one change actually was already in the draft. So this is not new. And a lot of those 8 criteria are usually really relevant. They have to do with fiscal impact, impact on abutters, impact on infrastructure, that kind of thing. The really important criteria within this overlay district are the ones that are already laid out in the ordinance.
Michael, can I ask you? Yeah.
Sure.
Can I ask you a question at this point? Madam Chair?
Yes, yeah.
Sure.
Those 8 criteria are not just in the town statute, they're also in state law.
No, those were specifically written only in Durham zoning ordinance. Those 8 conditional use criteria.
I found them in the state law.
Which law?
On conditional use. I Googled it. I thought,
Where, now, do you know which, is there an RSA you can point me
I
to?
think it was the state law, yeah. I've been known to be wrong, so I'll
Oh,
check.
I'm pretty sure that's not the case. I stand to be corrected. I'm quite sure that the 8 criteria in our ordinance were written by Durham specifically for our
Well,
ordinance.
maybe it picked up Durham's 8. But there is some language in state law about conditional use, I believe.
I'm not, I think there probably is here and there. Conditional use is allowed under state law. It's actually considered an innovative land use. And so we have a lot of conditional uses in Durham.
Could those have just pertained to like designated river systems? Because I know like Lamprey River is a designated state and federal wild and scenic. And I'm wondering, I know that there are additional criteria for if there's any impacts to those river systems. So I'm wondering if you were picking up on that, but I don't know.
I
just
trust
a
Michael,
guess.
he knows the state law very
Yeah.
well. I Googled it, I'm not sure if I picked up the state or the town. I thought it was.
No, at a glance, I Googled it. First thing that comes up, New Hampshire state law, but it's talking about allowing local authorities conditional use permits as a tool.
And I think the
Is
8
it
And there are
criteria,
8 criteria.
those 8 criteria are in the law.
Definition, authority, process, public hearing, use, assessment. So it seems like that's more giving local, definition, authority, process, public hearing, use, assessment. But that is the first thing that comes up when you Google it. So,
Right, but I don't believe the state gives any criteria. Certainly not our 8 criteria.
right. So this seems to just be allowing towns to do it.
It's identical criteria to the town. You suppose the state followed what the town did? I don't think
No,
so.
I don't believe the state has any criteria like ours, but, if you identify them, please let me know.
You just
If
look it
it's through
up.
statute or something.
Yeah. Again, I don't think it's like, I think it's just the state allowing conditional use permits to be set.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I think
the
Ann-
8
Ann had a question.
I had a question. I guess that you did not, that the 8 criteria do not apply, that is on the bottom of page 12 now is not new in this draft. However, I guess I am still concerned a lingering, a holdover question that I have meant to ask, and we haven't gotten to it previously. When I look at the criteria in the Durham regulation, it looks like some of them we would want to have apply to, even more so, like site suitability, character of the building and structures, preservation of natural resources seem like good things to have, especially in wetland and shoreland protection areas. And maybe this is a question more for Neil and Dwight or someone on the committee initially, but I guess I'm sort of, maybe they're separately laid out, I can see under conditional use criteria 175-64B. And so maybe
Right.
the idea is that they're already, but they're not entirely laid out there. And so I guess I was sort of wondering what if other people had thoughts about that. It seems odd to me that we are more permissive very close to shoreland than we would be elsewhere.
Well, these criteria, you're right, the ones at the bottom of page 11, conditional use criteria, these are the environmental criteria specifically written for the wetland and shoreland ordinance. In fact, they were amended about 2 years ago and rewritten and improved. And there really, a lot of work went into that. So the idea is that the criteria that you look at when you're considering a conditional use presently under either the wetland or the shoreland zone. There are the 8 general criteria, and those apply, once again, if somebody wants to put a structured parking in the central business zone, that's allowed by conditional use. A recreational facility outdoor in Coe's Corner, and those are, again, the uses and where the 8 criteria are looked at carefully by the planning board. The Conservation Commission is not involved in those conditional uses. And to be very frank, in the time I've been here, the 12 years, we've had a lot of conditional uses in the wetland and shoreland zones, and almost always, presently the ordinance is not clear. So we look at the 8 general and the 4 specific, but the 8 general are almost always, they're given short shrift, they're not applicable. The Conservation Commission focuses on the specific criteria.
So,
And if there are environmental concerns that the commission thinks should be reviewed, then that's where they should go, in the specific criteria. Really, the right process is not to have these 8 criteria apply, but if you think that the 4 written in this ordinance should be changed or expanded, now's the time to do that.
okay, thanks, Michael. And just to clarify to Anne's point, when it says here that the 8 criteria for conditional use do not apply, we're not talking about the conditional use criteria specifically for the wetland conservation district. So those 4 criteria would still apply.
Right, but the 8
Yes.
that are in 175-23C would not,
Right.
even for the planning board, which I guess
Right.
I find a little odd, which was why I brought it up. But
So, right.
Are there any, if
Is
you
there,
look at
but,
the
but
specific-
what you're saying, did I hear you right, Michael? The planning board would review those 8 general criteria for a project in the wetlands overlay district? It just
No,
would
they
be
would-
that the Conservation Commission would not, because?
No, neither would, they would not apply. So an application in the wetland and shoreland overlay district, the 4 specific criteria in this ordinance would apply.
So
And
Michael,
the Conservation Commission would make a recommendation whether you think those criteria are met, and the planning board would make a decision whether they're met based on, and follow your and listen to your recommendation.
so,
Could you just recap those 8 general criteria and,
Yeah, they are site suitability, external impacts, character of the site development, character of the buildings and structures, preservation of natural, cultural, historic, and scenic resources, impact on property values, availability of public services and facilities, and fiscal impacts.
So it's for some of these conditional uses, it's true that maybe we don't need applicants to go through and justify all of those. But now that we've added in single-family homes
Exactly.
into this ordinance where they weren't before, that now suddenly feels perhaps like some of those would apply to single-family residences, whereas, utilities or accessory structures certainly wouldn't necessarily need to go through all of that.
Well, let's run through those 8. Number 1, site suitability. Now again, when somebody applies for a conditional use, the criteria apply only to what they're doing. Let's say somebody wants to put a driveway for a single-family house that crosses the wetland. So the only thing that you are considering is the impact on the wetland and the wetland buffer from the driveway. That's
Right.
what you're looking at. You're not looking at, let's say somebody wants to build a new single-family house, and part of that involves a driveway. You're not looking at the single-family house, you're looking at a driveway crossing the buffer and the environmental impacts. So site suitability, I don't think that's really, site suitability for a driveway crossing the
Michael,
wetland buffer.
but
you're
now
that's already included, the appropriateness of that and the impacts are spoken to in these criteria.
Yeah, but now that we've added in a house in the wetland, it's not just the driveway that's passing over, it's the entire structure, right?
When it's the driveway, that's all you're looking at, the driveway crossing the wetland buffer.
But if the home is within the buffer, then aren't we?
No, if it's only the driveway, say it's a vacant lot, they're building a new house, but it's only the driveway, a portion of the driveway that's in the wetland buffer, they need a conditional use for the driveway, and all that anyone looks at is the impacts, really the environmental impacts of the driveway being located in the buffer. So you're not looking at site suitability for a driveway.
But we're now,
Yes.
but
You're looking
now,
at potential impacts of that driveway.
Let her speak, okay?
Michael, I guess I have a question. On page 11, I now see a proposed amendment to add a single-family house to the table, to the list of conditional uses in the Wetland and Shoreline Overlay District. Does that change, does that addition change the analysis that you just provided?
Change what?
Change the analysis or the idea that the general criteria of site suitability might not pertain if the whole house is located within
I don't see any difference. You're looking at a house, a street, a road, a sewer line, an accessory structure like a garage, a non-residential building, which can be very significant. Your question before, what are the potential environmental impacts of this proposal, this use, this structure, this activity? I think your review, a single family is different from a driveway or a utility, but you're looking at the same things.
who would determine that site suitability then? If somebody proposed a home or a structure and say there is an alternative that has less of an impact or is in a more appropriate, suitable, quote-unquote, suitable
Well,
site on the lot, who then does that analysis?
I think to some extent that first conditional use criteria, our conditional use criteria that we are looking at through the Conservation Commission does to some extent address that, right? There's no alternative design and location on the parcel.
Well,
that would-
specifically for the very specific criteria here, steep slopes, I note, is noted in general criteria, but not in these specific criteria. There's also floodplain as noted in the general criteria. Maybe that would come under aquatic connectivity, but it's a little bit different.
Let's, instead of going through the 8 general, let's first go through the 4 specific criteria and see if there's anything missing there. B1, there's no alternative design and location on the parcel for the proposed project, driveway, house, what have you, that would, A, have less adverse impact to SOD and overall ecological values, B, be workable, and C, be reasonable to expect the applicant to use. Number 2, I don't know if you want me to read these, or do you want to read them yourselves? I think if you, the question really, I'll tell you very frankly, the 8 criteria should not apply. The process is a problem, it's really cumbersome.
Okay.
We want to streamline this. The question before you then is, are these specific criteria in the WSOD good? Do you think that they should be changed in any way? That's the question before you.
I feel like that's a whole nother discussion, though. I mean, this is something we spent many meetings already going over, are these 4 criteria. So I don't necessarily know if that's what our time on right now. I mean, I have another question, and I'm not sure if anybody else noticed this. I thought that in our last discussion, one of the big concerns with the 300-foot buffer was that some people's property was going to be entirely within the buffer, that there would be property for sale that was entirely within the buffer, and that somehow people wouldn't be able to modify their homes or build a home or anything like that. And my understanding was that we were adding back in the single-family house only to be allowable within that 300-foot buffer, but maintaining a 150-foot buffer
Yes.
as well,
Of
right?
course.
And that doesn't seem to be reflected here. And
Well,
I'm not,
right,
correct me if I'm wrong, Michael.
No, you're right, I think I may have missed that. Wasn't that supposed to be 100 feet?
What is the,
We could look through the minutes, but
It was whatever the current one.
whatever the
Yeah,
current
whatever
is?
the current one is.
Well, currently, single family is not allowed at all, and the buffer does vary. But, right, I missed that. I think I recall that the commission's allow single family, but it would still have to be set back a minimum.
Yeah.
Or conditional use would only be beyond this, I think it was 100 feet. So that would mean if you
I think
wanted
it was
less than 100
150.
feet.
I thought it was 150.
I think it was 150.
I think it was 150, yeah, based on the vegetation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the context we were talking about.
I think it was 150. So I don't know where that would go. Would it be a single-family house would be allowed past a 150-foot buffer?
As a condition,
As a
as a conditional
conditional
use.
use.
And then the 175-65 on page 13, the special exception for single-family residences, that would still apply within the 150, so people could petition
Yes.
closer than 150? Is that with the idea being that there would be an increasing standard of review the closer you get to the shoreline?
So keep in mind that presently, the buffers and the setbacks vary depending upon the wetland. We have two ordinances now, wetland and shoreline overlay. And there's different parameters. So, but single family is not allowed in the overlay in either one of them. So the setback for single family is variously, well, it's really 75 feet, 100 feet, or 125 feet. So presently, depending on where you are, you can have your single family setback 75 feet. So if we say, okay, we're expanding the buffer to 330, but we are allowing single family, but still with a setback, so you're affecting single family rather than a setback of 75, 125, 100 or 25, you're saying it's got to be set back 150. You know, you could do that if you want, and then you're saying beyond 150, it would need a conditional use, but it could not be less than 150 unless it received a variance. which
A
is
special
here.
exception.
Yeah.
Well, it would be a variance. There is a different, we can talk about that other section, 175-65 separately.
Yeah, and I just want to remind us about sort of, again, our conversation that we had last time. And, you know, we're trying to balance, Michael, I think your concerns and the concerns we've heard from other people, that by going to this 330-foot buffer, which is recommended by scientists and recommended by sort of what we're seeing in terms of climate change and the needs of our fragile ecosystems here, that in order to make that feasible for landowners and the town employees, that there's going to be some exceptions, but we're going to maintain that 330-foot buffer, but there's going to be a few exceptions, including the conditional use of single-family homes behind a 150-foot buffer. Is everybody else agreed on that? I'm just wanting to make sure we're all on the same page.
Aaron, my question
Yes.
to that point is, have Dwight and Neil, who seem to be, have done so much work, have they really thought this through, and are they strongly in support of this? Or
Yes.
is there still more conversation to be done?
So they were both here at the last meeting, and I think we all were in agreement that we wanted to move forward with this 330-foot buffer with a few exceptions. So with some of these conditional uses that would make it a bit easier for people either who were considering making changes to their property or building on their property. And I think to your point, Anne, I'm not exactly sure where these things necessarily need to go. Are they under just conditional use, or would it be under this special exception?
Well, the special exception, let's come to that, because that's very specific.
Okay.
But I'm hearing that you want a 150-foot setback, and that's fine. We would simply write in here where we added single-family house. However, the conditional use may be, however, the single, it may not be closer than 150 feet. Conditional
Yes.
use applies only beyond 150 feet. Yeah, so the other items listed here, a conditional use could be granted anywhere, but a single family would have to be at least 150 feet. So if you want to be 200 feet away, you need a conditional use. If you want to be less than 150, you can't do it unless you get a variance, which is difficult.
Right.
I guess I do have one more comment on the conditional uses, which is it looks like we limit accessory structures. There's a note there about slope or grade. And even outside of the 150, we've now removed the general criteria, which talks about grade or slope. And we don't have this slope for accessory structure. Like, it seems that a single-family house, could be built on a very steep slope with no no review from the planning board on that point.
Well, the purpose of the overlay district is to protect water bodies. So they would have to show that, that they met the 4 criteria, and that there would not be an adverse impact on the wetland or the shoreland from erosion or what have you.
Including from erosion would be considered in that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so if you look at the 4 criteria, number 2 is will minimize soil disturbance and adverse impacts to water quality. Number 3 is,
To the extent workable.
yeah. Number 3 is, restoration and mitigation. And number 4 is a little more than water quality, not having adverse impacts to rare species, rare habitats, wildlife corridors, etc. Oh, but 4 is, well, yeah, we spent a lot of time on this, but 4 is kind of an unusual one. I think we need to get into that unless you want to.
Yeah, that's more recognizing broader ecosystem impacts. I guess one other question, Michael, in terms of, again, that sort of language that we're using for allowing single-family houses beyond a 150-foot buffer, is that specific only to tidal waters, the places where we are saying that we want a 330-foot buffer?
Well, the 330-foot buffer would apply to tidal areas.
Yes.
So that would, Oyster River, Little Bay, and Great Bay, and, a few Johnson Creek, tidal sections, et cetera. And where there's an occasional tidal wetland adjacent to the shoreland. So that's where the 330 would apply. And, the 330, for any of these items listed on page 11, you could do those things within the 330 by conditional use,
Yes.
except single family, in any event, must be at least 150 feet away. The others, theoretically could be, 20 feet or 100 feet.
Well, yeah, I'm just looking at,
used.
there's a 200-foot buffer for bogs, prime wetlands, and exemplary wetland communities. So if we say single-family homes only beyond 150 feet, does that impact this 200-foot buffer for bogs, prime wetlands? Do you understand what I'm saying? Do we need to be more
Right.
explicit than to say that single-family homes are allowed in conditional use in these specific areas beyond the 150-foot buffer area only?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Anything that has the buffer, if the buffer is less than 150 feet, then, if the buffer, for instance, in, non-tidal wetlands is 75 feet, you could have if you want a single family in that area, it's going to be outside the 75 feet. If you are, I'm sorry, not 75 feet, 100 feet from tidal. 100 feet from non-tidal. But if you are near the Lamprey River,
It's 200.
that buffer's 200 feet. So you could be, you could not be less than 150 feet from the Lamprey River, but you could be 150 to 200 feet by conditional use, or more than 200 feet without any review. So the 150 applies to every buffer, but it's, wherever it's 150 feet or more.
Okay.
So, other tidal, non-tidal rivers and streams, the buffer's 150 feet, so it's not relevant to that.
Okay. But for example, there's a 200-foot buffer for the Durham Reservoir and Lamprey River. Yeah, I'm just concerned if we have that 150-foot, single-family homes are allowed 100 feet, only after 150 feet. What about those areas that have the 200 foot?
So they would, so if
Conditional
you
use,
wanted
right.
to build
Okay.
if you wanted to build a single-family house near the Lamprey River, if you could not be less than
Right, before.
150 feet.
Okay,
If you wanted
200
to be 150 feet to 200 feet, you could get a conditional use.
Okay,
Only for that sliver. And then if you're more than 200 feet,
You don't need it. Okay.
Right.
All right, thank you. All right, yeah.
Michael, we talked about this, but I want to raise the issue in public. Wednesday night, the planning board's going to hear a proposal for workforce housing zoning amendments. And one of the workforce zoning amendments is actually the north side of Route 4, the Keefe property, which has Johnson's Creek on it. Now, there are restrictions if it's both in the wetland overlay, shoreland overlay district, and it's also being eyed as workforce housing, and 60% of the site has to be kept in environment, and we have 150 feet back from Johnson's Creek, are those two going to come into conflict with each other?
Well, speaking of that property, Johnson Creek, part of that is tidal. I think it was
Yeah,
lower,
it's listed
Johnson
as,
Creek.
yeah, it's in the
So
list.
that would be, on that particular parcel, it's a 117-acre parcel that's, crosses Johnson Creek. Part of it is easterly, most of it's on the west side of Johnson Creek. So the lower part of Johnson tidal, so there'd be a 330-foot, buffer there, but the upper part of Johnson Creek, I believe, is not tidal, so that would be a perennial non-tidal river, so that'd be 150 feet. So
My point
yeah.
is that when they bring this to the planning board to approve, they should be aware that there are, and I'm not saying they should or shouldn't be, but there are some serious restrictions because they want to put single-family houses in, and they want to do multifamily houses. That's the whole point of this affordable housing district. But yet the environmental policy that we're about to pass would seem to be in conflict with that. And as you know, I know that's a dilemma. Whether all I'm saying is that when it comes before the planning board, they should be advised that there are restrictions in place that might interfere with their plans to build 200 housing units or whatever the plan is now, without some change or turning it into something else.
Yeah, I mean, for that particular project, let's not allow, what is envisioned, well, the workforce housing overlay is only multifamily type housing, not single family, but it's not in core commercial or.
Well, I think the owner might want.
That's not.
The owner might
so-
want to build
so
it.
it would
Let
have
me
to be
finish,
setback.
Michael, please. The owner might want to build a single-family house near Johnson Creek.
He might, and that would be outside the workforce housing overlay district, because it's not allowed in the overlay, but he could still build a single family for himself.
About 150 feet away
It
from.
would have to be 100, well, it would have to be
300.
150 feet
Okay.
from.
I keep thinking of this 300 feet as the Canadian football field, because their Canadian football fields go 100 yards, 110 yards plus an end zone. And I try to picture that when I was at the UNH football game the other night, because if you picture the UNH football field and one of the end zones, I think that's about 330
Okay.
feet. That's a pretty good distance, but it's not quite as long as sometimes we describe it, crossing roads and so forth. But that's
So I'm just going to jump in because I don't want us to go on a tangent away from what we're discussing here today. And I just want to follow up. Are there any other concerns or questions about the revisions that Michael has made, the ones in blue, based on our conversation last month?
And that's on the top of page, bottom of 12 and top of 13.
I guess I still have a concern about the slope. I note that in the table, it notes that the SPOD construction on slopes exceeding 15%. Although maybe that's just, yeah. I guess I'm wondering, I guess we're still not permitting single-family homes close, so never mind, I retract that. I guess I have one other question then, which is 17565. Michael, you noted this special exception, which may be a variance or may not be. I'm not quite sure of the difference. And we've been talking about how there wouldn't be single-family homes within the 150-foot buffer, but now I guess I'm wondering how that relates to this special exception provision.
Right, good question. This 17565 is actually, it's in the current zoning ordinance. And so this item here is, there's some very minor changes to it. So what this is about, all right, so this is a situation where there's an existing vacant lot that is in the district, and a single-family residence could not be constructed on it because of the requirements of this overlay district. And this would, the 150 feet is very relevant to that. So let's say you have a lot, and there's one in particular that's kind of been debated a lot lately on Riverview Court. Let's say you have a lot that's, I don't know, 150 feet or 200 feet deep from, from a tidal water. And if they could apply for a conditional use, beyond 150 feet, and, maybe that's workable. Maybe that's enough space for it. But, if it's not, or let's say the lot's 150 or 160 feet deep, you would not be able to place a house on that lot because you can't go less than 150. So 175-65 allows a person to use that lot for a house if they meet these criteria before the zoning board. So it would override that 150-foot setback.
Right. So just as a practical application of lots on the Oyster River, for example, right in downtown Durham, which I think to purchase those lots and build a home on them. I think somebody just did last year. We had an application come through. Would apply for that special exception. Is that correct, Michael?
Yeah, I'm not sure in my time here, I'm not sure I think it's been used once or twice.
Oh, okay, so that
years
wasn't.
ago. I can't really remember.
Okay.
But again, that's what it would be. Let's say you've got whatever, 125, 160 feet of depth. You would not be able to build outside the 150. The idea is you should be able to use that lot for a single-family house, in accordance with these criteria. So it's worth reading these
But-
criteria.
Yeah,
It's
I
interesting
mean,
though,
likely
because I would
though-
say I'm familiar with that Riverview example.
But it's further, but now that I'm thinking about it, it's further back.
Yeah, right, so this is along the
Yeah.
Oyster River. And I reviewed that lot because the question came up. And so that is actually currently wetland in addition to it being tidal.
Oh, okay.
And so, the question is, if I personally owned that lot, I would never buy that lot as a buildable lot, first of all, because it's going to be underwater.
Yeah.
Or you have to build it on stilts, right?
Right.
In order to, and I think that I think I understand in some of these cases where there's like this balance, you might have a lot that's possibly buildable within 150 feet, and look at them, you just say, that is just not a buildable lot.
Yeah.
Why are we even allowing a home to go on that lot whatsoever? And so it's hard to know how you provide guidance. And in that second example, would you say, well, no, we're not even going to give you can you say, we can't give you a special exemption? because you're building within 15 feet of a wetland, and there's just no way that you can get an appropriate septic
Right.
system and well piece and a home and have it be
And wouldn't-
functional
Yeah.
25 years from now.
And wouldn't it also, in many of these cases, potentially have to go through state review? If it were along a river,
Yes,
water
yeah.
body, the state wouldn't allow that either. So I
So
think
would-
this
I'm
is
just
like
wondering,
very
is
rare
that-
exceptions. I think.
Does this special exception, does that allow for the Conservation Commission to review something and just say, you know, this is just ridiculous, this just isn't really feasible as a buildable lot, and we're really, really sorry, but it's based on the amount of wetlands that's on this property, it's just not a buildable lot, and just, that's okay. There's non-buildable lots out there. You know, you have to draw the line somewhere. I just don't know how to address that in this.
Well, and there is on the bottom of page 13, it says, when an application for special exception is submitted, copies are forwarded to the Conservation Commission as soon as possible. The commission may offer comments to the ZBA. The ZBA may continue an application to an additional meeting to provide time for the commission, but an application may not be continued to more than one additional meeting. We did actually, Audrey Klein, the code administrator, and I met with the zoning board there's a few things that refer to them, just to get their thoughts, and we didn't really complete that discussion, so a few of these things we'll look at some more, just on that one point. But, yeah, I mean, to Sarah's point, if a lot is truly should not be built upon, do these criteria allow the zoning board to reject that?
Yes,
Especially.
that's my question.
Well, especially point 6, there needs to be a reasonable building envelope to accommodate a single-family home and
Yeah.
septic system. It doesn't say water, but,
Yeah.
and if not,
I mean, yeah,
that
you
seems like a
can,
non-buildable lot.
you can change these. It's a little delicate because, we have to be very, if there's a lot of record, it would really have to be pretty bad to not allow them to put a house on it. Because they would take us, that we're taking away all use, so we'd have to be on solid ground, so to speak. But it's worth looking at these criteria.
I liked the pun, Michael.
Yes, that's good.
That was appropriate.
Got to be on solid ground. So I'm conscious of the fact that we're sort of jumping around in reviewing the ordinance here. And partly that was because we hadn't gotten any farther in our previous conversations than just agreeing on the buffers. And so so we started off today, again, I think recognizing that most of us on the commission would be in favor of that 330-foot buffer, as long as, and that the town and other people would probably be more amenable to that as long as we had some of these exceptions in place. So I just would love to take the temperature of the room right now and just hear from folks. How do you feel after talking through these different amendments, making amendments to the amendments? How do folks feel at this point about just all of the buffers and what we have written right now, including those 330-foot buffers at this point? Can we just go around and say if you, agree, have concerns, you can abstain?
Well, just as one of the
so we can
new
move on.
persons, I'm
Yeah.
just very supportive of what you all have done up to date on this. And what I was trying to get at with my last question was that if the people who really put the work into this feel like the changes capture the concept that we all seem to agree to, then I'm good
Okay.
with it because I don't know better
Okay.
than,
Yeah.
than you do about these things, right? I really respect what you have done. So that's what I would say. I like the concept that we had come to the last time, and nothing in this discussion has discouraged me from that. I just want to make sure that those of you who really have put your heart into it are looking at the kinds of things we were talking about tonight, and you're good with it.
Okay.
If
Thanks,
that's the
Steve.
case, then I'm good with it.
Okay, great. So as long as Dwight and Neil feel good about the conversation.
And all of you, I know
Okay.
you've
Yeah.
been
Well, they've been
working
the
on it
ones
for a
who've
while.
done, I think, the bulk of the research and the work and thinking about the buffers and all of that as well. What do you
Yeah,
think, Jacob?
I second that. I have a lot of
Okay.
trust in them, and having gone through it several times at this point too, I felt like where we left off last time was a really good spot.
Okay.
To touch in on a couple of the other, amendments Michael, proposed, the eliminating a lot of the nuisance stuff like posting a sign, eliminating, notice to property owners within 300 feet, not just direct abutters, kind of the nuisance stuff, eliminating that makes this a little more palatable to the public and palatable to the planning board. So I really liked the vegetation, keeping it like at where we ended up, and Michael's recommendation on the simple majority versus super majority. I think where we left off last time makes this a lot more palatable, and it was good to hear all of the proposed amendments to this, and it being new, I feel really good with this. A lot of trust with the work that everybody's put in before we joined, but also really like where we are currently.
I think, I pressed Michael at the last meeting for, if he didn't like 330, what would he like? And that's when he mentioned there were certain conditions, but he needed to think about it. And I compliment him because I think you've done a really good job in preparing something that now can go forward to the planning board.
Yes.
It does talk about the 330 foot, but it has some modifications that should help the planning board understand what has to be done, and hopefully they would adopt what the action committee has proposed. But I think you did what we asked you to do, and this is, it seems okay to me. I'm not looking forward to all the discussions that are going to happen next, but I think you've kept faith with the Conservation Commission as to what we should put forward to the next two bodies, which would be the planning board and the one I'm on, the town council.
That's great to hear, Wayne. Thanks.
I'm supportive of the changes as proposed.
Okay, thanks. Good. I don't think we need to have any formal vote or anything. Sarah, did you have anything to add?
Not to the buffers, but I did have a few comments about a few other portions of this.
Okay, so I think I'd love to get your feedback since this is probably your last meeting. So
Yeah.
I was going to suggest that maybe we just continue with reviewing the different sections beyond the buffer. But given the fact that Sarah's not going to be here, I would love to hear your feedback and suggestions. Is that okay with everybody else? Okay.
I'll just mention a couple things, and then one of them actually I've mentioned before and is a good segue to our next topic, which is the invasives, right? And actually this question came up because of the way we refer to invasive plants within the wetland overlay district. Actually, this is a buffers. My note here is just a clear. We talk about the width of the buffers, but that can be interpreted two ways, and I think having some clarification might make it helpful to both the Conservation Commission as well as somebody applying.
Okay.
And that is, you have your linear and then as your crow flies, right? And so if you are making, your question is it 300 feet as the crow flies, or is it 300 feet linear? And so those are two very different things. If you have a steeper slope, then your crow flies might be 250 feet, right? Versus 300 feet. So just adding something, and it doesn't matter to me, but I think that would be helpful, whatever way you choose to negotiate that.
Oh, it's always, Sarah, these measurements are always.
Horizontal?
Horizontal.
Horizontal
But-
measurement, then put that in there, make that really, I would make that clear so that there isn't confusion between the expectation and the person making an application for a condition.
Yeah, because that applies to a lot of places in the ordinance, and I don't know that we state that anywhere, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
helpful.
And in addition, if we're supporting the 330 with reference to a particular source, I think we would want to be consistent
Yes.
with that source as well. So
Yes.
that's an excellent point.
Okay. On page, let's see. I think, and some of these were a little ambiguous. I'll do on page 8. We talk about septic systems and the replacement of an existing septic system. And these are more, again, questions, but we are anticipating groundwater rise, especially in the coastal area. That can have significant impact to the functionality of a septic system. And so is there a way to address potential groundwater rise or what we predict as a groundwater rise in this particular section of the ordinance, but also taking into consideration the lifespan of a septic system, right? So, that mapper that shows groundwater or predicts groundwater rise, maybe it rises a foot in the next 25 years, but maybe it's rising 5 feet over 100 years. Well, you don't need to use that 100-foot one, right? Let's look at the 25-foot one because you hope that your septic system lasts that long. And do you somehow try to use the science that's there now to accommodate that within the ordinance? It's just a question, a proposal. And then, and obviously, you're looking a lot at surface water rise within this, and you've thought about that with especially your tidal systems. I just wasn't sure the groundwater component of it was looked at in that particular case. And then, again, because a lot of my background is like in conservation and stewardship, and I read a lot of legal documents where you're enforcing conservation restrictions. On page 7, you talk about potential adverse impacts on a wetland or water body that's minor or inconsequential. And again, for me, it's like, well, who judges that to be true? Who do you have looking at that question and making that determination? And is this enforcement really possible, right? So who would enforce that? So that's kind of the questions that I had when I was looking at this. And that's regarding agricultural activity. I'm not sure there are folks here who, do you have somebody go out there and measure, nitrogen concentrations upstream and downstream of a farm? Is this really measurable and actionable, putting that in there? That's all. For me, I need concrete, measurable, and actionable things when I look at like a document like this. So those were just kind of the questions that came up for me. And then
That's all?
invasives. What?
That's all?
That's and then invasives. No, I'm sure I had more, but I took a deep breath and said I can live with that.
It's, in Massachusetts, under Title V, anytime a property changes hands, a workable, approved septic system must be installed. I know that because I sold a house in Massachusetts and had to rip out the old system and put in a brand-new system that completely complied with the law. And that's not a bad law to have, especially on Cape Cod, where I was, because within so many feet of the ocean, it applies. And it's a bit of a challenge, but it's working down there. I'm not suggesting it here, but I would support it. Anyway.
Well, one question
So maybe,
that I have.
are you go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, if I get elected to the legislature, I'll propose it.
Go ahead, Michael.
Well, it is interesting. I mean, we do in the ordinance, and this is the current ordinance, septic systems are set back 125 feet. And we have other things that are set back much further that probably have less impact. I wonder how we think about all of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that something that
But-
maybe
Well, I think to your,
Modify
yeah, I think to your point, certainly.
distance? But for me, it's more about that groundwater impact
Yeah.
than the surface water impact. But how do you measure that and understanding within wetland and shoreland overlay district where your groundwater, right? So,
Right. That's not technically in our
right,
purview,
right.
the ground.
As Michael's suggesting, do we increase that buffer distance, the allowable distance to the surface water based on that, or at least within tidal systems, because of that concern of groundwater rise in addition to surface water rise in those areas?
Yeah, I
Just a
think
thought.
that's a great point. And I feel like that's maybe something that maybe we can ask Dwight and Neil to go back to. I imagine there's some research being done. The Buffers on the Bay group and other communities, I imagine, have thought about this. So this might be something we should look into potentially. And maybe they have already. But I think this will be a question for Dwight and Neil. Maybe next time we can revisit that. That's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, because it's, I think the reason it's 125 feet, maybe because DES would use them and there's some confidence there and not wanting to interfere too much with state law. But the language here is 125 feet from the reference line. So that's the same for everything, a wetland, a stream, middle body. And I wonder if it makes sense to have different standards for, septic systems depending on the location.
Yeah.
But we can ask Dwight and see what he
Let's ask
thinks.
them, yeah,
Okay.
Next time. Okay. Thank you, Sarah.
Do we want to move into invasives a little bit?
Yeah, I was just
And
going to say,
with-
because
with
I
this
would love
defi-
to get your input on that as well.
and I apologize if I think one of the things within the wetland and shoreline overlay district that I noticed is that, based on the work that I do, usually I go to the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture. They're the ones within the state of New Hampshire that maintain that list of invasive species. And so New Hampshire Department of Agriculture isn't even listed within this definition. They list UNH Cooperative Extension, DES, and Native Plant Trust. And so, within the wetland and shoreland
sorry,
overlay
what
district,
page
it's
are you-
page 1.
Okay, because it does mention on page 6. It does mention, okay, so page 1.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so we should have Department of Ag, New Hampshire Department of Ag.
For sure, they're the go-to at this time.
Yep.
And they, Doug Saigan it works for Department of Agriculture. And he is the go-to invasive plant specialist
Okay.
and expert
That's
at the state of New Hampshire.
Okay.
And they're the ones that really, I think the comprehensive list also lists New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, and so you probably could also include that.
Okay.
The State Department of Agriculture or USDA?
New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food. NHDAMF.
The current,
NHD,
AMF, New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food.
the current WCOD and SPOD refer to the United States Fish and Wildlife Service National List of Plant Species that occur in wetlands, New Hampshire. Is that something else that we should reference?
So that for invasives or for identification of wetlands?
Sorry, where are
'Cause
you?
For identification of native or non-native, non-invasive vegetation. I'm in the current zoning ordinance.
Oh,
They maintain a list of wetland plant species. They're the, saying wetlands delineation
Okay.
or identification. That's the go-to list for that. And they each plant by whether it's obligate or upland facultative or wetland facultative species. I'm trying to remember if it also identifies whether it's an invasive or native or naturalized species for wetland identification, but I can't recall. I might have that on my computer. If you'd like me to look that up, the list up, I'm pretty sure I have it within my
Maybe
resources.
I guess that was a more general question, which is this current Appendix B seems to refer to upland environments. Should we also consider wetland or riparian environments? Or is that not important to have under site plan review?
the site plan review is just what an applicant would plant on a new.
Yes. Yeah, so
But there could
unless
be
they're putting
wetland
in a
dock.
koi pond, I'm just putting milfoil inside their pond, Eurasian milfoil, I should specify, then I'm not sure it says relevant.
Maybe it doesn't come up as often.
The comprehensive invasive plant list
So is that our next, is it this one, or are you still referring to something from our,
well, with this invasive plants,
Okay.
which was updated in January 2023, does include aquatic plant species, and that list is maintained by New Hampshire DES. They have the jurisdiction over
Okay.
wetland plant species versus upland plant species. So again, that's why I would include both of those
Include that.
within here. And I like the idea of keeping this dynamic because this list changes. Every year, there's new plants that get added to this
I'm
list.
sorry, Sarah, which list, are you referencing a list that is referenced in the WSOD?
No, yes, I'm just suggesting that this is a list maintained by New Hampshire DES and New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, and so that's who I would refer to on page 1, within the
Okay.
wetland and shoreland overlay
So
district.
not native, okay, invasive plants are identified by New Hampshire Department of NHDES?
Yes,
Okay. Not by extension, because they're getting their information from NHDE? Okay.
Yeah.
And Department of
Or can you just repeat that? So this is in the WSOD on the first page. Invasive plants are identified as such by who?
New Hampshire DES and the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food.
NHDAM,
All right, so identified by those two agencies.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Did you have any other feedback in the wetland shoreland overlay district, Sarah?
No, but
Or-
I figured I'd leave with that one so that we could segue into.
Yes, okay, that's great.
We're
And
getting
now we
late.
can segue into, so I think even though we're about 13 minutes ahead of schedule in terms of switching over to talking about native plant species, this is something that we keep pushing aside. And again, I think since we have you here, Sarah, and we'd love to get your feedback on this resource as well. So if everybody's in agreement, I'm going to say we're going to push ahead. We will revisit our WSOD again next month. Hopefully Neil and Dwight will be back, and we can pick up where we left off next month. Okay, and so now let's move on to looking at this Appendix B, recommended landscaping species and prohibitive invasive species. For comments, and Sarah, it sounds like you had some initially.
Yeah,
so
and
you want to start?
I was hoping Nick would be here because
I know.
we spent like a little bit of time kind of
okay.
going over this together. And I was
Okay.
sort of hoping he would do more of the chatting or presenting.
Can I interrupt you, sorry,
Yeah.
for just 1
Yeah,
second, and
absolutely.
get clarification from you or from Michael, again, about just, this is an existing document that has, who prepared this initially and who is using it right now?
Well, the site plan regulations were rewritten in 2015
Okay,
thoroughly, and this was prepared at the time. There were a number of people that had input. Robbie Woodburn, landscape architect, was one of them, and other people, I can't remember though. And it's used, well, the site plan regulations, come into play when anybody wants to do a new multifamily or non-residential project. And the language in the regulations is trees shall be, unless otherwise approved, trees have to come from this list, and species on, it says species on the prohibited or restricted invasive plant species list maintained by Department of Agriculture shall not be planted, which is a little bit inconsistent from, we should probably just,
yes,
correct our reference there.
okay,
So
okay, thank you.
And Michael, I just had a general question. I found it rather confusing that they were recommended and prohibited in the same appendix. And I was wondering if it might ease references elsewhere to have, recommended in B and prohibited in,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
in part because I opened this document to the last page to start with, and I was like, why are we recommending planting knotweed?
let's recommend unanimous. Let's hear it for winged unanimous.
And so I want to minimize having any confusion there. So that, just a comment.
Well, and so I would say my general thought on this is that as far as recommendations, as a steward of conservation areas of land, I always recommend native trees and plants as much as possible, right? And not all of these lists and any of these recommend us. It's a mix of native species as well as non-natives. And I'm wondering why we even have a recommended list. In part, it should just maybe a blanket statement that we recommend as best as possible to use native and period. And then the other part of this is the prohibited list. And at first I started going through here thinking there's so much that's missing, but are all of these used in landscaping? And then secondly, why do we even have a list? It's not dynamic. We know that this list from the state is dynamic. It changes every year. It doesn't make sense to have this static thing. And so just make it a reference to the list that's on the DS and Department of Ag website.
Yeah, and maybe to your point, Anne, I wonder if in this appendix, instead of, because I have some thoughts about why we maybe should have recommended, some ideas for recommended shrubs and trees, but maybe up at the top, we just say this, invasive species as identified by this dynamic website are prohibited in planting. We're prohibiting these species.
Yeah.
Based on their classification by the New Hampshire Department of Ag, Markets and
Yeah.
Food.
I would say
So
where it
maybe
gets a
we don't
little,
even need an appendix, we just have that up at the top.
where it gets squirrely. So if you have, and did you send this out, Michael? I don't know if you sent, maybe, Rich Kelly was referring to it in the meetings, 2 meetings ago. So I apologize, probably would have been helpful, but it's fairly comprehensive. It is, looks like on landscape, it's like the list itself takes up 9 pages. It includes both terrestrial and aquatic species, but it also includes prohibited species as well as species on the watch list, right, for both of those. And it takes a little bit to weed through here to find all those prohibited terrestrial species. But also in talking to Nick, like, there are some of these things that are on the quote-unquote watch list that, from both of our experience, really should be on that prohibited list if we were the decision makers, right? And that we have to have had experience trying to manage for those. Although it is quite possible that they will be upgraded. Sometimes those are species that have just recently been introduced and they haven't spread significantly yet, and we're kind of in those stages of just trying to control them and isolate them to keep them from becoming a problem. And that's part of that EDRR, which is the Early Detection Rapid Response Species. So an example of that would be, I think, knotweed is not, knapweed, a variety of knapweeds. We have them over at Meadows, and they are non-native, and they do spread. Not all of them are listed as a prohibited species, but they are listed as an EDRR, which is that early detection where we're trying to eliminate them. And so I would recommend that those don't get on the recommended list or they should be included within that prohibited list. Does that make sense to folks? Okay. I'm trying to see if there is another one that you would be familiar with that's on that early detection. So
I thought Tree of Heaven came up in one of our discussion, marked as an EDRR here.
yes, and that again is one that I would not recommend somebody
Yeah.
plant. And so it's not prohibited, but
Right,
I wouldn't want that
Okay.
being something that gets planted in a landscaping project.
That's a great point. And to your other point of sort of why do we have these other species listed here, would it be possible to do something similar instead of having the list to refer to this listing database of native naturalized landscaping plants for permitted or recommended shade trees, ornamental trees, etc.
Yeah, and
And is
I
there
mean,
a
Native
site?
Plant Trust is a good source. I would, You know who would be really great at listing resources is Roanne.
Is Roanne.
I would just ask Roanne who she would refer to
I would say, I think,
or have as references.
you know, while I love native species, I also think that, you know, and I guess we can still say we recommend, but I might have an issue with saying, you know, we're only permitting people to plant native species. I think that there's such a sort of wide range of species that have become naturalized, that our climate is changing, you know, different species may not technically be native, but may end
That's
up
right.
doing really well here and providing good habitat. And so I don't know if I necessarily agree with saying that, you know, we're only recommending only native species in landscaping context, but I'm open to what other folks think about that. If other people have thoughts.
I don't think this document mentions native species at all, so I would support putting in a note that
Yeah.
to encourage people to consider that and including resources for it as well.
Yeah, I also find it strange that it's the Missouri Botanical Garden that is what we're referencing when I'm sure there's probably more local sites. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's more about prohibiting the invasive one, right, than it is the recommendation of. And
Yeah.
it'd be very easy to say, you know, we recommend native, but not exclusively native, right?
Yes,
Um,
yeah.
I know, but is it even our role to recommend landscaping?
I would say
I
so.
think so.
Yeah,
Yeah?
yeah. I think that that's a big part. I mean,
Yeah.
at Farm Day, you know, here we are, you know, promoting the native species and
We are,
stuff,
that's
right?
right, yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I think if we're talking about invasive and things that we shouldn't be planting and doing education around that, I think that we could certainly recommend.
yeah,
Certain
because the
things.
education piece, I think, is a big
Yeah.
part, because I think if people knew what the natives were, they'd be more likely to plant.
Mm-hmm.
Or to even know, like, if you didn't know anything about planting at all, you know, you could at least steer your landscaper in that direction, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
you know, here's a list of native stuff, you know, get as many of these as you can, you know, stay away from the invasives.
Any other thoughts, comments? So-
Well, it's a little
yeah.
tricky. So there's a couple, so I think if the commission ultimately, even though this is the site plan regs, the planning board has purview, I'm sure they would welcome any recommendation from you for changes. So it's a little tricky because, you know, do we do this, we've got, you know, prohibited invasive and then we have recommended. Do we do these as a list or do we do this as a link? Do we make it recommended or prohibited? Well, I guess those are the questions. So there's a couple different pieces to this.
I agree that, like, the dynamic lists are very important. Especially you're talking about something that was developed in 2015 and references the Missouri Botanical Garden website. Like,
Yeah.
it would be very important, I think, for us to have dynamic lists if they are available. And maybe we can cut this down to where they are just links. Here are the invasive ones per New Hampshire, and here are the native species. And, you know, really curate it down even from dynamic lists. I think the bigger question would be the EDRR. Is that right, Sarah? EDRR?
Yeah, the early detection rapid response.
I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's a question. Are we prohibiting those as well? Which seems like Sarah was in support of that.
Well, again, I think we could certainly make that recommendation to the planning board as the Conservation
Yeah.
Commission, that we recommend you use this particular website and that these plants are on a prohibited planting list, both the actual identified invasives and those that are on the watch list. So I think we could certainly say that.
Is there a regulatory process
Yeah,
by which people have to have their list
yeah.
approved by
Yeah.
the town?
Well,
I didn't know that.
Have our town, I thought you meant like a regulatory process for how they decide on which plants are invasive or not.
It's pretty fluid. I mean, the Conservation Commission and Planning Board, whatever makes sense, we can do. You can have a list, you can have a link, it can be recommendations, it can be prohibitions, it can be requirement. But, requirement for, if it's a list of acceptable species, it always allows the Planning Board at its discretion to allow others. So it's really however we want to do it.
So it seems to me that perhaps we can make some revisions to this that would include the website, the dynamic website. And then we'll need to get in touch with Roanne. Does anybody else have any other contacts that might know more about the plant databases? I'll
think
reach out to Roanne.
Nick will be helpful.
Yeah, Nick will probably be helpful to us. So,
Maybe not, I don't know if you know about recommended land,
Okay.
though. He does a lot of invasive work.
okay,
Um,
but not about the landscaping piece. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I can reach out to some folks and I'll reach out to Roanne as well about some of whether there's one or two sites that we could send people to for the recommended native or other naturalized landscape species. And I was thinking, again, so this specific document is for the planning board site regulations, but it seems to me that these two resources could be really great on our website for homeowners as they're thinking about landscaping. These resources could be really great. So maybe that's something that we can not just do for the site plan regulations, but also offer up more widely for town residents as well.
Yeah, like in the newsletter too.
Yeah.
Just education, doesn't have to be a site plan.
Yeah,
Just push it out.
yeah, definitely. Okay. So it sounds like we'll need to revisit this. Are there any other comments or thoughts about the landscaping species? Do folks feel good about those proposed changes? Does anybody have any thoughts about why we would want to maintain some written list versus a link? Any benefits to doing that? No? Okay.
I think the cultural notes are probably useful for site plan review in ensuring that the
Yeah.
chosen species survive.
Yeah.
And so I would suggest that if we find a replacement, we try to find one that includes similar sort of practical
Yeah.
on-the-ground considerations.
Yeah, I agree. I think the one reason why I might think that having a list like this could be helpful would be depending on who it is that's reviewing the site plan regulations. If it's people on the planning board who might not have a ton of expertise around landscaping and native plants, having everything in one place, and the cultural notes as well might be helpful. Maybe that's something we can look into in whatever website that we recommend, is that it would be an easy to follow resource. All right.
Maybe it makes sense to have an actual list of the recommended species, shrubs, ornamental trees, etc. But for the invasive, that would be a dynamic link. Because I find it is helpful both for board members and for applicants. Because it's like, and even abutters, it's like I want my they need to screen their property, their development from me, and they can go right to this list and says, oh, this has listed, can you have, Scotch pine, I like those, or some. So it
Yes.
is helpful to have it all in one place.
Okay.
I do think that the risk, though, is like, in the recommended shrubs and trees for screening and buffering, you have euonymus and privet, both of which are considered invasive at this time. Do you know? And so that's the risk.
This is out of date.
It's, right? And so I think really if you wanted to ask somebody, you would go to a landscape, you'd go to Stratum Circle Nursery and say, I really would like to plant a row of trees along my boundary to create a screen with my adjacent neighbor. What do you recommend that I get? Right? That's where you're going to get, and they're going to say, well, what kind of soils do you have? And have you tested to see if they're, acidic or not? And they're going to ask those questions and help direct you. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not, if we say we recommend natives, they go in and they say, well, the planning board is recommending I use natives as much as possible. Do you have some that you would recommend for this purpose, right? I don't know. I think that's...
Okay.
I think linking them to different websites where they can see that information. But I hear what you're saying, that doesn't give somebody who is a member reviewing that overview, right? That who might not understand or know native plants very
Yes.
well.
Yeah, so maybe we can do a combination of seeing if we can find some resources that would be helpful online. And then maybe, it seems like a lot, but reviewing, at least going through, noting where there are species on here that really wouldn't be appropriate or that are non-native and we just really wouldn't recommend. And so again, I know we can't ask you to do that at this point, but maybe I'll check with Roanne and see if she'd be willing to take a look at it.
Or if just some like local nurseries had lists already
Yeah.
that they give
True,
clients, right?
true,
That we
yeah,
could-
or landscapers,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Well, you know what? I was curious. I was like, how many of these recommended shade trees are actually on the Stratum Circle Nursery website? Because you can go up and like look
Oh,
at their
okay.
inventory. And plants go in and out of fashion, right?
Yeah, yeah,
just like
it's
your
true.
clothing. So they don't always have the same
Yeah.
options
Yeah.
year to year. And they might, the other thing is that, and Roanne will tell you this, they might offer what appears to be like a local tree species, but it's some sort of variant on that. Those are really popular, right? Like
Yeah.
yarrow is a lovely flower, and we have a native yarrow, but then they offer all of these variations,
Colored
right? And same
yarrows,
thing
yeah.
with, say, goldenrods. And they're not necessarily
Don't
native.
offer the same type of benefits that the native species would.
Yeah, but,
Yeah. Okay. All right, well, it sounds like we have some more work to do on this. So, yeah, whether or not we revisit it next month, I think might depend on if we hear back from Roanne and some of the other folks that we'll reach out to before the next meeting. Okay. So I think at this point, we have a few minutes for other business. If anybody has any other business or roundtable. We always sort of mix the other business or roundtable together. Any last thoughts? No business? No? Okay.
And I'll just bring
Yes.
one thing up.
Yes, yes.
Michael, a couple weeks ago, sent out an email with like this list of the conservation easements in town. And and some of this came from a few different directions, I think, Michael. But part of that was kind of reviewing conservation lands with this workforce housing overlay district. And then, but it also came up in our stewarding engagement and education working group because we were looking at, okay, where we want to create a recreational map of all the trails and the, conservation lands that have public access that have trails on them in town. And so it's kind of come from a variety of directions. That it's an interesting list, but I think it is question for the Conservation Commission to kind of look at. I don't know if I would have framed it from a conservation perspective the way that Michael didn't, but the granite mapping for sure needs to be updated. And actually at the last Places Conference, they were really advocating for that at UNH Cooperative Extension. They've got a staff member who, granted, is run through UNH, and it does all this geo-referencing of the social, cultural, and public works, you name it, it's in there, from water resources and to wildlife habitat corridors, to where train lines are, and public roads. So, and that is something that Steve Letterman, if he had the time, could address. But I think it's a good question, because I know that the list Michael provided didn't match up with the Stratford Regional Planning Commission, and that's because theirs, I'm pretty sure, is based off of granite, which is not correct. And so you get these discrepancies and misinformation depending on what you're looking at. And so I think, I think it'd be an interesting question to kind of evaluate where our conservation lands, and where our conservation focus areas might be in town. And as a Conservation Commission, I think it's an interesting question for you all to be asking and wondering. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, maybe we'll invite you back in your capacity as the UNH Extension Community Conservation Representative to help us at some point. So,
Sure.
okay, thank you. And thanks again, Sarah, so much for all of your help and participation.
Yeah.
We're going to miss you. So. All right. I guess we need to make a motion. Does anybody want to make a motion to adjourn the meeting? Steve. Okay.
Seconded.
Okay. So, do we have to vote? Do we have to vote on adjourning? Sorry. Okay, I'm just going to. All right, we're done.
Thank you, everybody.